I had a professor last month who I walked into the classroom, and on the board were 3 words. It says, "Guns kill people." I said, all right, that's going to be a good way to start off class. This is going to be a fun day. So I asked him a question. Do forks make people fat? Did my pencil give me a bad test on the last score? But what I was doing there is I was not being politically correct. Our founders weren't politically correct. And a gentleman about a month and a half ago, I know wasn't politically correct. How about that guy, I think his name's Dr. Carson? He wasn't politically correct when he had that prayer breakfast. And the next speaker will introduce him. The next speaker is Millie Hallow from the National Rifle Association. But tying both together, right now we're at a siege against the Second Amendment. Especially in our schools, there's a progressive agenda being pushed, teaching kids that you don't need to defend yourself. A government bureaucrat will save you. I think you heard about that DHS video. It actually showed them trying to get scissors to defend against an armed intruder. It's scary. And the only way to possibly protect your liberty is to have the tools to do so. And there's an old expression, because the professors and teachers nowadays are saying, oh, the Constitution's outdated. The Constitution was not written for 1776. It was written to stand the test of time, because it details human action. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Millie Hallow from the National Rifle Association and the Vice Chair of the American Conservative Union.
Hey, CPAC. Saturday morning, we made it. Welcome to President Obama's prayer breakfast. I know it's a clever title, but please, this is going to be a great spiritual conversation between 2 extraordinary men, Dr. Ben Carson and Mr. Eric Metaxas. So, I'd like to begin with a passage from Luke 12:47. For unto whomsoever much is given shall be much required. And Dr. Carson, continuing, to whom men have committed much, much of him they will ask more. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have an unprecedented opportunity to listen to 2 extraordinary men to whom much has been given. Now, if you know Dr. Ben Carson's story, some of you might dispute the much has been given. Raised by a single parent, a mother not well educated, in circumstances where financial distress was the norm, a temper, academic struggles in elementary school, how is that much has been given? By all accounts, the early much has been given was his mom. God gave him a mom that knew his gifts, who instilled in him the discipline to realize those gifts, and it was she who helped him realize how much indeed he had been given. I know that you want to hear his story in his own words, so I won't elaborate, but Yale and the University of Michigan Medical School became part of his journey. Eric Metaxas, growing up in Danbury, Connecticut, also ended up at Yale. Maybe this panel should be entitled, God and Men at Yale. His journey was one of a very successful, eclectic writing career that brought him to understand culture versus faith. And what brings them both here today is their shared experience of having been featured speakers at the National Prayer Breakfast. Eric in 2012 and Dr. Carson just a month ago. They shared their faith, their view of life from a faith perspective, with a national audience and President Obama on the dais. Eric has written for VeggieTales, Chuck Colson. He's the author of a New York Times best-selling book right now, #1, Bonhoeffer. Those 3 things are not necessarily in the same sentence, a varied career. I first read him in his series, Everything You Always Wanted to Know About God, But Were Afraid to Ask, with sequels to follow. It's a very edifying view for a Catholic girl that resisted Vatican II. Dr. Ben Carson, I know, conservative. Dr. Ben Carson is the director now of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins. The recipient of many awards, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He is also the author of many books and founder of the Carson Scholars Program, which motivates young people. He made medical history by leading a surgical team that separated 7-month-old twins that were joined at birth, and continues that miracle of gifted hands around the world today. Men of accomplishment, but more importantly, men of faith. These men have encountered and embraced a deep and abiding faith in God, and they lead lives that inspire and instruct us all in our own faith journeys. And I hope you will be, am prepared to listen, to digest, to be enlightened, to pray, and to praise. So I give you Dr. Ben Carson and Mr. Eric Metaxas.
Let's roll the windows down, turn the radio up, let the wind blow through our hair. Love is reckless. Let's get reckless tonight.
Terrific. Can I come there?
There ain't nothing out here but a big old Texas sky.
Eric is up first. He's ready.
Wow, God bless you, Millie. Thank you. What is this? Wow. Wow, what a pleasure to be back at CPAC. This is the third time I've spoken at CPAC, and it's the first time the crowd has been all around me. This is really, really impressive. Thank you for being here. I know that I'm here today because a year ago I was the speaker at the National Prayer Breakfast. If you have not seen that speech, please go to my website, ericmetaxas.com, and watch it. If you go to ericmetaxas.com by noon and follow me on Twitter, you will get a free Wacko Birds t-shirt. Thank you. But seriously, if you watch the speech, you will see at the end I led the audience in singing Amazing Grace. I will not do that just now, but I would like to leave you, if I could, in lip-syncing the national anthem. All right, that's a Super Bowl joke. I guess I probably need to get serious for a moment or two. Or was it an inauguration joke? I get them all confused. Yeah. They had too much in common. Okay, to be serious and non-pejorative, some of you know I wrote a biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and it's because, thank you, and it's because of Bonhoeffer that I find myself thinking this morning and often recently about the issue of religious freedom in America. Many people have said that they see disturbing parallels between what was happening in Germany in the 30s on this issue and America today, and I'm very sorry to agree. Let me begin with my hometown, Danbury, Connecticut. Some of you, go Hatters, some of you know that Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter to the Danbury Baptists in 1801 in which he uses the phrase separation of church and state. And in case there is anyone who doesn't know it, the sense in which Jefferson uses that phrase is actually the opposite of how it's generally thought of today. Today we often hear it means that the state needs to be protected from religion and that religion should have no place in government or society. But Jefferson and the founders thought precisely the opposite. They knew that the state, capital S, was always tempted to take over everything, including the religious side of people's lives, so they put a protection in something called a constitution, capital C, that the government could not favor any religion over another and could not prohibit the free exercise of religion. Yeah, you're cheering for the founders, not for me. They wanted churches and religions to be protected from the government, from Leviathan. Why? Because they knew that what people believed and their freedom to live out and practice one's most deeply held beliefs was at the very heart of this radical and fragile experiment that they had just launched into the world. All right, so where are the threats to religious freedom today? Well, for one thing, understand we're not talking about freedom of worship. In a speech about 18 months ago, Hillary Clinton replaced the phrase freedom of religion with freedom of worship, and my hero and friend Chuck Colson noticed it and was disturbed by it. Why? Because these are radically different things. They have freedom of worship in China. So what exactly is freedom of worship? Well, in my book, Bonhoeffer, I talk about a meeting between Bonhoeffer's friend, the Reverend Martin Niemöller, who early on in the Third Reich was one of those fooled by Hitler. In that meeting, Niemöller says something to Hitler about how he, Niemöller, cares about Germany and the Third Reich. And Hitler cuts him off and says, "I built the Third Reich. You just worry about your sermons." There, in a few words, you have the idea of freedom of worship. Freedom of worship says you can have your little strange rituals and say whatever you like in your little religious buildings for an hour or two on Sundays, but once you leave that building, you will bow to the secular orthodoxy of the state. We will tell you what to think on the big and important questions, questions like when life begins and who gets to decide when to end it and what marriage is. And if you don't like it, tough luck, that's freedom of worship, and they have that in China, and they had that in Germany in Bonhoeffer's day. But the Founding Fathers said just the opposite. They said that faith inside that church building must live on and flourish outside that church building for the rest of the week. In fact, the founders believed that the success of the American experiment depends on precisely that. In Os Guinness's magnificent and very important book, A Free People's Suicide, he reminds us what we should already know, that the founders believed freedom of religion was at the heart of the American experiment. In that book, he talks about the golden triangle of freedom. I'll bet you never heard about that in school or in college. Just 2 generations of Americans have kind of missed this foundational principle given to us by the founders. Os Guinness explains that the founders knew that freedom and self-government were not possible without virtue. Without virtue, we would simply vote to line our own pockets and elect those leaders who would line our pockets. But they believed that freedom required virtue, and virtue in turn required faith. Freedom requires virtue. Virtue requires faith. It was mainly faith that motivated citizens toward virtue. So freedom required virtue required faith, but faith in turn requires freedom, the golden triangle. And the whole triangle falls apart if you take away any one of those 3 things. They support each other. Please read A Free People's Suicide, and please understand the founders' idea of ordered liberty. We have lost that understanding in America, and to lose that is to cease to be America. Chuck Colson saw some serious threats to religious freedom on the horizon, and in 2009, some of you know he led the way in drafting something called the Manhattan Declaration. If you don't know about that, go to manhattandeclaration.org. Please read it, please sign it, please tell the world about it, because already now, a few years later, those distant threats that he saw in 2009 are coming to pass. First of all, of course, there's the HHS mandate. Many people have dismissed this as something to do with contraceptives. It has just about nothing to do with contraceptives and everything to do with religious freedom. It's the issue of the government saying to a religious group that whatever you think about these issues means nothing. We're the state, and we will force you to pay for contraceptives and abortifacients. We will force you to violate your conscience and your religion. Why? Because we can. We have the power, and you Catholics are just a backward religious minority. You may know that Joseph Stalin, in a battle with the Catholic Church, once asked, "How many divisions does the Pope have?" It's an ugly moment in American history when the current presidential administration is taking a page out of the book of Joseph Stalin. When the government bullies a minority instead of protecting that minority, that is the beginning of the end of America. We protect minorities here. So I, as a non-Catholic who doesn't share that entire view on contraception, am nonetheless obliged as an American to defend those who have those views. That's what makes us America. We protect America. In America, we protect minorities, and we protect religious freedom for all. For every religion, for every agnostic, for every atheist. That's what we do. And once we stop doing that, we are no longer America. The second issue of religious freedom today is the attempt to legally redefine marriage. This has been framed as an issue of expanding a supposed right to marry whomever one chooses, which it is not. This issue is about religious freedom. So here's my question to all the legal scholars across America. What about the religious freedom of those who dissent on that issue? When the legal definition is changed, will they be forced to stifle their religious feelings because the state demands it? This is not a live and let live issue. If it were, that would be another story. No, if marriage is legally redefined, it will utterly cripple religious freedom in America, and it's already beginning to do that, and no one is even talking about this. Before we make this incredibly momentous decision about one of the most important things in our lives, how about if we have a discussion about this? How about if we talk about religious freedom, which is at the heart of this? Not one of the cable networks ever discusses this, and it's about time we have this discussion. So what we're seeing on both these issues is the unconstitutional establishment of a religion, aided and abetted by the state. But it's a secular religion and a secular orthodoxy. Indeed, it's a secular fundamentalism, and it says on the subject of marriage, there is to be no discussion. The science is settled. It's the future. And some in the GOP are jumping on that bandwagon. But ladies and gentlemen, whenever someone tells you the science is settled and the debate is over, that's a sure sign that the debate is not over, but that they are deathly afraid that the debate might begin. So they want to tell you it's settled, and let's hurry up and make this decision and get on the right side of history. But God determines who is on the right side of history, not the mainstream media, and certainly not the government. Most of you who are here see the growing state gobbling up more and more of the free market and freedom itself. And if religious freedom is threatened, it is just the same. These are the twin engines that have made this the greatest country in the history of the world. Finally, let me say that when the government kills freedom of religion and faith is pushed out of the public square, it's not just bad things that happen, it's that many good things don't happen. In my book, Amazing Grace, I tell the story of William Wilberforce. It's the story of what happens when a man drags religion into the public square and when he allows it to affect how government behaves. As a result, the government was forced to abolish the slave trade. Don't you think the African slaves were glad Wilberforce allowed his religion to affect his politics? In those days, the settled science was that slavery and the slave trade were just the way it was, and to even discuss abolishing them was insane. But devout Christians who believed every human being is made in the image of God forced that discussion. The story of Bonhoeffer shows that it was many serious Christians who led the conspiracy against Hitler. The settled science was that the Third Reich was the future, and any dissenting voices were simply silenced. But the voices of faith were not so easily silenced. Indeed, even Bonhoeffer, though murdered by the Nazis, speaks to us today. He's speaking to us, to America, and warning us not to let ourselves be silenced. He called the church to stand up and be the church, and he is doing so now to the American church. Stand up for what is right, knowing that the whole country will be blessed, not just the church. But what about America? When has faith entered the public square in this country? Well, did you know that it was serious Christians, fanatical Christians, who started the abolitionist movement in this country? Just watch Steven Spielberg's movie Amistad. Did you know that devout Christians led the civil rights movement in this country? Some would have you think it was secular liberals who led it, but it was a church-based, faith-based movement from beginning to end. Did you know that Rosa Parks was a devout Christian? She was chosen to kick off the bus boycott because of her faith. Did you know Jackie Robinson was a serious Christian, and that Branch Rickey, who picked him to be the one to break the color barrier in baseball, did so because of Robinson's Christian faith, and that Rickey was himself a Bible-thumping Christian who did what he did in part because he believed God wanted him to do it. There's a movie coming out about Jackie Robinson this month. I'll bet they don't even mention that. I do mention it in my next book, Seven Men, because I think everyone should know that it was Jackie Robinson's faith that stood behind what he did. If you push the voices of faith out of the mainstream and replace them with a secular orthodoxy, you take away the single most important check the founders put in place against unbridled statism. My friends, here's the story. We have had so much religious freedom in this country that we hardly are aware of what it even is. We're like the fish who doesn't know what water is. We've been blessed with religious freedom, so blessed we hardly recognize when it's being threatened. So let me be one voice warning my fellow Americans that unless we take this very seriously and very soon, it will soon be too late and we won't be able to do anything about it. Please take this seriously. Please read Os Guinness's book, A Free People's Suicide. Please visit the ManhattanDeclaration.org. And please fight for our country. This is about America. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you.
They got 3 in the front and 4 in the back of a Civic. Camped out all night on the
Thank you. Okay, you're eating into my time. Okay. All right, thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here. I thank the organizers for inviting me. And thank you, Eric, for what you said. You made it unnecessary for me to talk about political correctness. Enough said. But I want to talk a little bit about what's logical and what's common sense today, because we don't hear a lot of that. And I don't think that common sense should be something that is just for conservatives. You know, liberals and everybody else should understand and enjoy common sense also. For some strange reason, sometimes they don't. But, you know, it's very interesting, you know, the outpouring of sentiment that I received after the speech at the National Prayer Breakfast. I got so much mail, letters, books, just amazing from everybody. And some of the more poignant ones were from older Americans who said they had given up and they were just waiting to die. And now they felt a sense of revival once again. You know? And that's very sad that we have reached a point in our lives where there's so many people who feel that they're not represented anymore. And this is something I want you people who are in Congress and who are in the Senate and who are in the White House to understand. You work for the people. You represent the people. You know, if you can understand that. I also got a few nasty grams from people. How dare you insult my president? You are a N-word and you need to get back to, you know, it's just unbelievable, you know. But, you know, when did we reach a point where you have to have a certain philosophy because of the color of your skin? When did that happen? You know? You know, a reporter once asked me why I didn't talk a lot about race. And I said, because I'm a neurosurgeon. And they thought that was pretty strange. And I said, you see, when I take someone to the operating room and I cut the scalp and peel it down and take off the bone flap and open the dura, I'm operating on the thing that makes that person who they are. The cover doesn't make them who they are. When are we going to understand that? But you know, the thing that really is important to me, and it's largely because of my own background, you know, growing up in a single-parent home in the inner city with dire poverty, terrible temper, poor self-esteem. My nickname in school was Dummy. And you know, it was because I had a mother who believed in me. And she was always saying, Benjamin, you're much too smart to be bringing home grades like this. I brought them home anyway, but she was always saying that, you know. She was very encouraging. And, but more importantly, you know, she made sure that at some point we turned off the TV and started reading books. And, she worked a lot. My mother worked 3 jobs at a time. She would leave at 5 in the morning, get home at midnight. And, people always said to me, well, why did you guys read the books? Your mother wasn't there. Well, she would know if you didn't read the books. And the fact of the matter is, back in those days, you had to do what your parents said. You couldn't call 911 or some social worker or some psychologist who said, let the kid express themselves, And there was a reason for that. But, the education worked for me. I started reading within a year and a half. I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class. The same kids who were calling me dummy in the 5th grade were coming to me in the 7th grade. Benny, how do you work this problem? And I'd say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. But maybe a little obnoxious, but it sure felt good. But, the thing is, by that time, I had a very, very different impression of myself. And education is such a fundamental principle of the success of America. And we're allowing it to go under. You go out there and you talk to the average person now, they may be able to tell you who won Dancing with the Stars. They may be able to tell you who won the football game. But they can't tell you anything that's important. They don't know about foreign policy. They don't even know about the way that our government works and the structure of it and what things mean. And consequently, they have become the ignorant. They have become the unprepared. This is exactly what the founders of this country warned against. They said, our system of government is based upon a well-educated and informed populace. And if our populace ever becomes anything other than that, we will become a different country. They knew what they were talking about. And as witness to that fact, Congress has a 9% approval rating. And yet we return the people at a rate of 90% to Congress. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that people go in the voting booth and they say, there's a name I recognize. I'm going to vote for that one. They have no idea whether that person represents them or not. And what I'm saying to people, the people of America today, is that we are responsible. This is a country that's for, of, and by the people, not for, of, and by the government. And if we turn it over to them, we cannot complain about what they're doing, because this is the natural course of men, and we have to hold their feet to the fire. And that's why we have these complex brains. And I don't say this just because I'm a neurosurgeon. The brain is the most complex and phenomenal organ system in the universe. Your brain, billions and billions of neurons, hundreds of billions, even trillions of interconnections. The number of interconnections you have rivals the national debt. I mean, it's just an amazing amount. And it has the ability to remember everything you've ever seen, everything you've ever heard. Your brain can process more than 2 million bits of information in 1 second. And the reason that human beings have these gigantic frontal lobes is because we're the creatures that have the ability to extract information from the past, integrate that with information of the present, and project that into the future. Which means we can be proactive, we can plan, we can strategize. We don't have to just react. And yet, that's what animals do, react. And a lot of people today have decided that they rather react like animals rather than planning and strategizing. And this is what we've done now. We're reacting to, what we see as our fiscal woes without planning for the future, without really caring about what is happening to the next generation. And you don't have to be a brain surgeon or a rocket scientist to understand that if we continue to spin ourselves into oblivion, we are going to destroy our nation. If I were trying to destroy this nation, if you just, let's say you magically put me, into the White House, and now, all right. All right. I take it back. but let's say somebody were there and they wanted to destroy this nation. What would you do? Let me tell you what I would do. First of all, I would create division among the people. I would have everybody pitted against each other, because a wise man by the name of Jesus once said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And then I would encourage a culture of ridicule for basic morality and the principles that made and sustained the country. And then I would undermine the financial stability of the country and drive it so far into debt that there was absolutely no chance that it could recover. And I would weaken the military and destroy the morale of the military. That's what I would do, and I guarantee you it would work. Now, the question is, it appears coincidentally that those are the very things that are happening right now. And the question is, how do we stop it? Can we stop it? Or must we inexorably follow the same kind of path that other pinnacle nations have followed before their destruction? Because all of those things that I just mentioned are the things that happened to other pinnacle nations before their fall. And, you know, this is not something that has just started in the last 4 or 5 years. This has been going on for quite some time now. So let's not lay all the blame on any one particular person. But the fact of the matter is, we all have a responsibility to recognize what is going on and to use our influence to correct some of these things. You know, one of the things that my wife and I have done is, you know, I go into the schools and we see all these trophies, all-state basketball, all-state wrestling, all-state this, that, and the other. The quarterback was the big man on campus. What about the academic superstar? What did they get? You know, a National Honor Society pin, pat on the head, they're a little nerd, you know. Nobody really cared about them. And, you know, I was aware of a survey that was done in 22 countries looking at the ability of 8th grade equivalents to solve math and science problems. We were one of the 22 countries, and we came in number 21 out of 22, barely beat out number 22. And I was devastated, and I said, we've got to do something about this. And we can't wait for the government to do something about this. We, as the private sector, have got to do something. So we started giving out scholarships out of our own pocket to children from all backgrounds who achieved at the highest possible levels academically and also demonstrated humanitarian qualities, that they cared about other people. And we gave out our first 25 scholarships 17 years ago, and just in the state of Maryland. And now, today, we have over 5,000 scholars in all 50 states. And these are incredibly bright young people. And in fact, just yesterday, I found out that one of our scholars was accepted into the neurosurgery residency at Johns Hopkins. So, fantastic. But the other component of the program is we put in reading rooms. And in that case, we particularly target Title I schools, where a lot of the kids come from homes with no books, and they go to schools with no libraries. Those are the ones who drop out of school. We have a 30% high school dropout rate. We really can't afford that. So we create these rooms that no kid could possibly pass it up. And they get points for the number of books they read, and they can trade them in for prizes. And in the beginning, they do it for the prizes, but after a while, it begins to translate into much better academic performance, and that's really the goal. Because you see, we can't afford to throw any of those young people away. Because for every one of those young people we keep from going down that path of self-destruction, that's one less person that you have to protect yourself and your family from, one less person you have to pay for in the penal or the welfare system, one more tax-paying, productive member of society who may discover a new energy source. We need all of them. And the humanitarian part of the program, of the Carson Scholars Fund, is every bit as important as the academic part. Because you see, we are a humanitarian nation. And historically, we have been. Many people don't know this, but socialism started as a reaction to America. Because people in Europe, they looked at us and they said, wait a minute, look at those Americans. You got people like Ford and Kellogg and Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, Carnegie Mellon. They got so much money. And look at everybody else who's got nothing. And you can't run a system like that. You have to have an overarching government that receives the funds and redistributes it in a fair and equitable way. Have you ever heard that before? Well, what they didn't realize is that all those names that I just said, instead of like the land barons of Europe hoarding money and passing it down from generation to generation, instead, they built the infrastructure of this nation. They put in the transcontinental railroad. They built factories and textile mills. They built the mechanism that created the most powerful and dynamic middle class the world has ever seen, which rapidly took us to the pinnacle. They built universities and museums and charitable organizations, because that has been the nature of Americans. We have always been generous. Nobody is starving on the streets. We've always taken care of them. We have churches, which actually are a much better mechanism for taking care of the poor, because they are right there with them. This is one of the reasons that we give tax deductions to churches, because they do that. So why is the government trying to duplicate what they're supposed to be doing? You know, we need to start thinking smartly about the way that we use our resources, use our money. And, you know, in 2009, 40 of the wealthiest families in America pledged to give away half of their wealth to charity. Go someplace else in the world and ask the 40th wealthiest families to give away half their wealth. They'll look at you like you got 6 heads. This is an American phenomenon. We take care of our own. We always have. It is not the government's responsibility. It is our responsibility as citizens. And then, as long as we're talking about fairness, let's talk about taxes. You know, some people criticize me at the prayer breakfast for bringing up God and the Bible. I mean, it is a prayer breakfast, right? I don't understand that. But at any rate, you know, if God thinks proportionality is fair, who are we to say that it is unfair? The minute you begin to deviate away from proportionality, you begin to inject your own philosophy. And that is always going to lead you in one direction or another. I think that's why God had a program like that. You make $10 billion, you put in $1 billion. You make $10, you put in $1. You know, the guy who paid $1 billion just put in $1 billion times more than the other guy, but they get the same rights. What could be fairer than that? You know, that's ridiculous. Now, I'll tell you what is not fair. What is not fair is when you exempt some people and you say, there, you poor little thing, you don't have to pay anything, we'll take care of you. You know what? To me, that's very offensive, having grown up poor, because what you're saying is that I, the superior elite one, will take care of you. Why? Because you see, that superior elite group needs to be superior and elite. And they can't be superior and elite unless you have a whole bunch of people down there groveling around. So you keep them down there by feeding them. You know? But the other ulterior motive is, if everybody doesn't have skin in the game, then you can just persecute this 1% or this 2% or this 5%. If everybody has skin in the game, you have to be responsible. Because if you come talking about raising taxes, you're raising taxes on everybody, you better have a darn good reason. Doesn't matter about 1 or 2%. but it really matters about everybody. That's what's fair. And then, just briefly, I don't have time to really go into it, but let me tell you something. Healthcare, you know, 1/6 of our economy, if the government can control that, they can control just about everything. We need to understand what is going on, because there are much more economic models that can be used to give us good health care than what we have now. And we were asleep at the wheel to let it happen, but we have to find a way still to make it work. And if we have to work within the framework of the Affordable Health Care Act, fine. If we can find a way to defund it, fine. But we have to find more efficient ways. Think about this. 80% of the encounters between a patient and a healthcare provider could easily be handled by a health savings account. 80% of the encounter, without the need to insinuate a third party or bureaucracy, which sucks out at least a third of the money. And, there are ways that we can do this. We can use bridge insurance and catastrophic insurance. Some of the, I don't want to call them morons, but it's something similar to that, who say, well, Carson just talks about HSAs. How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to have catastrophic health care? Read the book. Read the book, America the Beautiful, and some other things that I've written. It'll show you how to do that. But obviously, I'm thinking about those things. I mean, it just, I don't know, it's almost laughable, some of the things that I hear people say who criticize you. They say, he's a neurosurgeon, so he couldn't know anything about economics. It's not brain surgery. And I can tell you this much, even as a lowly brain surgeon. If you have the highest corporate tax rates in the world, then of course corporations are going to have money elsewhere. Corporations are not in business to be social welfare organizations. They are there to make money. And a wise government knows how to use that to their advantage. There is a ton of money outside this country and inside this country just waiting to be unleashed to make all kinds of jobs and opportunities if we just treat them as our friends and not as our enemies. And finally, we have to resist this war on God. People don't want to talk about God, and don't you ever dare mention Jesus Christ. And this is supposed to be a country where we have freedom of religion and freedom of speech. It is absolutely absurd. Let's let everybody believe what they want to believe. And that means, PC police, don't you be coming down on the people who believe in God and who believe in Jesus. If they want to put something out that shows their belief, they have every right to do that. And we need to know, we need to understand that we are not each other's enemies in this country. And it is only the political class that derives its power by creating friction. It is only the media that derives its importance by creating friction, that uses every little thing to create this chasm between people. This is not who we are. We have much more in common with each other than we have apart. And we have to be smart enough to understand that. And we have to live by godly principles of loving your fellow man, of caring about your neighbor, of developing your God-given talents to the utmost so that you become valuable to the people around you, of having values and principles that guide your life. And if we do that, not only will we remain a pinnacle nation, but we will truly have one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much.
All right, all right. Yeah. How do you think it went? Went okay?
I
it went okay?
think it was fantastic.
All right, I'm going to play the role of Dick Cavett, a friend of mine, and ask you some questions. But I can't think of anything. Did you announce that you're leaving medicine?
Oh, I didn't announce that. In 106 days, I will be retiring. And, I'll be 62 years old in September. And I strongly believe that there's a reason that pilots are asked to retire before they start crashing airplanes.
I can see you got... He's got the shakes. I can see it. I'm up close here. He's got the shakes. Yeah, you need to get out of that. Quick.
So I'd much rather quit while I'm at the top of my game.
Yeah.
And there's so many more things that can be done.
Really? All right. So that's the big announcement. Dr. Carson's getting out of medicine. I've got a little announcement to make.
Okay.
You're getting out of brain surgery. In about 100 days, I'm going to be getting into brain surgery. Yeah, I'm going into medicine. And, how tough could it be, right? It's not brain surgery. So, obviously, people are asking the question, are you leaving medicine so that you can do other things, maybe in the political sphere? Would you at least guardedly say possibly?
Well, I would say, I'm very dedicated to education of the next generation. And I encourage everybody to go to carsonscholars.org and look us up and see how you can get involved. Once we get that taken care of, who knows what I'm going to do.
Yes, you can tell. I was going to say, this is a very sophisticated political audience, and they can tell that you've entered politics because you're not answering that question straight. Obviously, we can see what's happening, and you can't say anything publicly. And let me say, if you're looking for a white guy on the ticket, I'm your man.
I will just say, I'm only interested in the brain.
Only interested in the brain. My brain's pretty pink. We'll talk backstage. What do you see happening? I mean, I spoke about religious freedom. I really do believe that we're having a conversation in America right now, at least some of us are having a conversation about the idea that we are headed to a cliff fiscally, that if we don't get the debt under control, if we don't reverse engines, if we don't feed the free market and deregulate and enable the market to do what it's meant to do, we will lose our freedom. But I really do believe that religious freedom is the thing that nobody's talking about, and that they're somehow linked. They're linked. I mentioned Os Guinness's book, A Free People's Suicide. In there, he shows the inextricable link, this golden triangle, which the founders knew. You talk about education.
Right.
What scandalizes me, Dr. Carson, is that at least 2 generations, I went to school in the 70s, no one taught us about the founders' idea of ordered liberty.
Right.
How can you have a generation of Americans and another generation of Americans really be America if we don't even know? I mean, because to be an American, it's not your blood type, it's not your ethnic group, it's an idea.
Exactly.
And once the citizens don't even know what it is that they have and what they're supposed to protect and promulgate, how can we be America?
Well, that was the reason that I wrote America the Beautiful.
Did you write a book?
I wrote a book.
Can we get that? Is that possible? Can we get that on Amazon? Or
You're not supposed to mention that.
how do I get this wonderful product?
Because then the left says, you're only there to promote your book.
It's obvious that you don't care about anything except money, so go ahead.
Although,
yeah, it's obvious. All these doctors, I know, go ahead.
although I do appreciate the fact that people have bought it, and it's last week was #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. That was good. But
Let me say, speaking as an author, I deeply resent you. Bonhoeffer, I believe, is available. Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
But the fact of the matter is, because people don't know our history, because they don't know who we are, they don't recognize those forces which are changing.
That's the point. No, that was effectively my point. I thought you were listening.
Yeah, I was. I appreciate the fact that you negated the need for me to say several things. It was great.
Good. But you still went over time. Did you know that? And we're just about out of time right now. Well, in the few minutes we have left, let me just say how wonderful it was to hear your speech. I was in the room at the National Prayer